Good morning and welcome back to the lecture series on partition of India in print media and cinema. So, today we are talking about home and nostalgia. Mushinul Hassan notes the current shift that has happened in the vis-a-vis the focus. So, Mushinul Hassan notes the shift that has happened vis-a-vis the focus of partition literature scholarship, where we see the intellectual resources are now being exposed to the inadequacy of numerous narratives on independence and partition, and they compel us to look further into personalized narratives, into fresh themes, and thereby adopt new approaches for investigating the topic of partition. So, partition studies has now undergone some critical sensitivity that literary representations so partition studies consider literary representations more seriously than before. So, a call for new resources for remembering and representing the partition is it has been placed, and so there is an onus there is an onus on literature which was previously not there. So, the local memory, the social relations and the complex subjectivity are now all coming under the historian's scrutiny. Clifford Geertz actually raises a very pertinent question regarding who describes whom. So, depiction itself is a form of power. Who is able to narrate and who is being narrated in what terms is actually something not neutral, and it is deeply related with the question of power. So, basically in the 1990s we had these debates of history and theory questioning the traditional understanding of the relation between fact, representation and reality. So, we see we see that the different scholars and critics take cognizance of the intertextual relationship between fictive history and textualized history, right. So, the understanding of a dialectical relationship between literary representation and history carries an enormous possibility, or rather enormous possibilities, because then what happens is that literature is seen as a legitimate source for understanding the past, and it is actually analogous to any other sources found in the archives. Literature is an important, so literature actually plays an important role in the societies that have faced unendurable violence, where we see that literary characters being rendered very complex, nuanced shades, where they are in a way they are a departure from the clear cut facts stated by a disinterested history. The literary characters can be the perpetrator and the victim at the same time, and this is this complexity is something that literature has achieved above and beyond formal documentation of formal historical documentation. Literature plays an important role in the society to show these nuanced characters, the characters that have various shades of grey. In the absence of public testimonials, literature compels us to take stock through which we can face the self other, and in fact we can understand, we can realize the ideas of justice and freedom through these stories of characters, stories about characters, experiences of literary characters that are far removed from our own experiences and our own situation. So, I think literature plays a great role in creating empathy, in creating a fellow feeling for a human whose situation is different from us. So, in recalling, reading, criticizing and discussing something that was deposited in the past, humans participate in an extended horizon of meaning production. So, memory capacity is limited by focus and bias because of psychological pressures, as well as because of the incongruent memories that are hidden overwritten and possibly effaced. So, we see that on the level of cultural memory, retrieving the past is always a dynamic at work, right. Forgetting can have different forms. There can be a passive form of cultural forgetting. One can actively forget through destroying documents, through trashing documents, and then one can actually resort to passive forgetting, passive cultural forgetting through hiding, neglecting, abandoning or leaving the documents behind. So, in these cases the objects are not materially destroyed, basically they fall out of the frame of attention, valuation and use. Museum, whatever we see in the museum actually is whatever is represented in the museum is something that is arranged to catch attention, public attention and make a lasting impression. The same museum also has storerooms where other paintings, documents are archived in peripheral spaces such as cellars, such as attics, that are not publicly displayed. So, Jan Assmann refers to the actively circulated memory that keeps the past present as canon. So, what Jan Assmann says is that what is displayed to the public according to Jan Assmann is the canon, and the passively stored memory preserves the past as an archive. So, canonization means sanctification of certain aspects of the past, which endows texts, persons, artifacts and monuments with a sanctified status, and is and it sets them off from the rest as charged with the highest meaning and value. So, canonization is a process of selection which presupposes decisions and power struggles. It ascribes value to certain objects from the past, certain persona from the past, adds an aura and sacrosanct status to them. And so, duration in cultural memory is the central aim of this procedure of canonizing and making certain objects as synonymous with a certain event from the past. So, and this happens at the expense of sidelining the others. And so, canon is independent of historical change and it is immune to ups and downs of social taste. It is not built up anew by every generation. Rather, it outlives the generations who have to encounter and reinterpret it anew according to their time, right. So, we understand that selection, what goes into becoming a canon and rather becoming durable against time and in the cultural memory involves some power struggles, some decisions by decisions by the major influential forces in the society, and it also brings in the politics of representation. What is synonymous with partition and what are not, who are actually relegated to the fringes. So, partitions fictions from Punjab or Bengal contain all that is locally contingent and truthfully remembered, and therefore constitute an important means of our self making. What makes ourself from the past is also involved with the question of canon, because the canon greatly supplies material that shapes our understanding of a certain certain events from the history, from the past. This brings us, so reading partitions literature is not just an archival retrieval, but a way in which the past can be understood to make it signify in the present. How does literary imagination cope with the violence and genocide to reconstitute human subjectivity enabled by the land? How do narrations, so how do narratives create us? How are narratives responsible for formation of social groups and communities? These are some of the questions that we need to look at. Now, Shadow Lines by Amitav Ghosh is a novel that weaves fact and fiction together through a narrative of lives of the people that are living across nations. It spans almost half a century of recent Indian history in the postmodern time, and the story is a blend of cultural differences and social norms. Tabish Khair notes that the novel Shadow Lines romanticizes the imaginations as a whole. So, the story by Amitav Ghosh is set against the backdrop of World War II and the communal riots in 1964, which happened in some parts of India and East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh. And the narrative presents that the partition, which resulted in the division, the partition which resulted in the division of a nation into two parts, was actually unable to divide the memories of the people, the unified memories of the people who were a section of whom were forced to migrate to the other side. So, we see that the novel narrates the story of three generations spread over Calcutta, London and Dhaka. So, we see a span of time and space being used for building of a narrative. The narrative actually happens through journeying across a large span of time and a significant spans, geographical spans, including Calcutta, London and Dhaka. So, the narrative includes a large span of time and a geographical expanse including Calcutta, London and Dhaka. The novel is constructed on the memories and experiences of a young boy that is growing up in Calcutta, and later on he moves to Delhi and further to London. The narrator is the observer of the entire situation, and the character, what is interesting is that the character actually takes shape through his interaction with other characters in the novel. So, the title itself signifies that there are shadow lines between different nations. These are not real lines, but these are shadows of lines, virtual lines, which can be surpassed through transnational emotional bondings, and this transcendence is reflected through the characters of Datta Chaudhary and the Trisosans and later the Prices. We see that the memories of the English and the Bengali families connect across time and across space, although their nationalities, their cultural social realities differ. So, the lines drawn between different countries cannot really cut through the emotions and feelings that bind together, that bring together a humanity. The question that Amitav Ghosh puts here is whether cultures can be actually contained and cultures can be compartmentalized and put into airtight boundaries made by select politicians. So, with shadow lines, Amitav Ghosh basically challenges one of the most dehumanized creations of human society, which is the border, a border that legitimizes habitation of a few people within a given geopolitical territory at the cost of marking others as illegitimate, as outsiders, and thereby justifying their evacuation. So, the border is the basis on which nations and nationalities are outlined, and the process of forming a nation is definitely not a benign one. Formation of a nation is actually scripted through violent meanings, through violent language and rules that do not actually accommodate all. So, the narrative follows a non-linear style, with the story moving back and forth, moving into flashbacks and moving in and out of contexts, in and out of situations and episodes. It symbolically indicates that borders are non-linear, just like a story cannot just move progress in a simplified manner. It's very difficult to etch borders clearly and unproblematically. Borders are metaphorically represented as shadows, like the title suggests. The narrative traverses the stories of characters like Trideep, the narrator, and his grandmother, and the plot is structured around the deeply impacting tragedies of war, riots, partition, displacement, killings, and the formation of nations like Bangladesh, India and Pakistan. It also delves on, it also refers to the Swadeshi movement on the one hand and the blow of the World War on England on the other. So, shadow lines are superficial in the entirety, and basically nothing can divide a people who form strong cultural emotional bonds with one another. So, the narrator's concrete imagination dwells heavily on Trideep's memories and experiences. The narrator goes to London for his doctoral work, but then he feels that it is not a new place to him, because he has learned about London through other characters. He has seen London through the eyes of his mentor and inspiration, Trideep. The narrator actually understands a place that he has never visited through, even before he has visited London. The narrator learns about London so much, and the London and such that London is familiar to him. He has seen London even before visiting it through the eyes of his mentor and inspiration, Trideep. So, Trideep's account of London and the narrator's extraordinary imagination makes him feel that he has already been here, he has already visited the place before. He stays in London for about a year, but his life is, so we see that a person is physically located in one part of the globe, but his life is affected by what is happening back at home or back next to home in the neighborhood. So, his life is most affected not by the incidents happening immediately geographically around him in London, but by what is happening in Dhaka, a place that he has never personally visited in his life. He is a place he has only heard in terms of stories. So, the narrator has seen Dhaka through the eyes of his grandmother, who had migrated years back, decades ago from there. So, a tragedy in Dhaka, however, changes his life forever, although he has never been there. He loses his mentor Trideep in the roads of Dhaka, right. So, the figure of the grandmother is very important in the story. She represents India's national identity in the nationalist movement. She is a migrant from Dhaka, but her ardent love for India cannot be questioned. So, she goes back to Dhaka after 20 years in order to bring her uncle to Calcutta, and just then a revolution breaks out. A revolution starts. She realizes that she has, after coming back to Dhaka decades later, she realizes she has become an alien to her birthplace, and she also realizes, she tells Trideep says in this regard, you are a foreigner now. So, it is an irony that the grandmother has become foreigner to her birthland. She is as foreigner as May. May is actually not from this part of the globe, and in fact Trideep says that you have become, the grandmother has become more foreigner as compared to May, because at least May does not need a visa to come to Dhaka, but the grandmother needs her visa. These are the paradoxes, the ironies that have been laid out by a tragic event such as partition, which Amitav Ghosh actually portrays in his novel. The character of Jatamoshai Thamma's uncle, says that I do not believe in this India Shindia. Suppose when you get there, they decide to draw another line somewhere. What will you do then? Where will you move to? As for me, I was born here and I will die here. He, along with Trideep, therefore, become, and we see that later on he and Trideep both become victims of communal rioting in Dhaka. So, the novel actually throws a light on how the ancient societies were more flexible, whereas in contrast to the modern societies that are actually are divisive, and it recounts the potential of symbols, how symbols can virtually create social groups, pit one social group against the other, and the symbol, or what Milan Kundera calls as a symbolic voltage, can virtually paralyze a subcontinent, symbols that are ingrained in a person's consciousness, and so we cannot overcome our perception of the other, and thereby connect, which actually leads to the split inside the mind. This is something I have been telling in my earlier lectures also. So, the partition first happens inside the mind of the person, inside the consciousness, followed by its physical, presence on the map. So, the symbols through which social groups, cohere together and conceptualize others as different from them, linguistically, ethnically, racially, religiously, and so forth, that is actually responsible for paralyzing the subcontinent and in fact the globe at large. So, communalism, according to Amitav Ghosh, is the exclusive attachment to one's own community, which is also, and the communal feeling is actually honed, further sharpened by one's hostility, through one's hostility towards another community. So, communalism is not only attachment to one's own community, but also stimulating a sense of hostility towards other communities, especially that share geographical and political space with one's own. So, the incongruities innate in this idea of nation are delved in complex dimensions in the novel. The characters are unable to make any meaning of the intrinsic inconsistencies with respect to nation and home. So, the novel, I mean, we see the different aspects, the different facets of space being represented in the novel in very paradoxical manner. The representation of border, map, atlas, game of houses, a variety of real houses being depicted in various cities, from Colombo to Dhanamundi and even Baliganj in Calcutta. So, Ghosh basically portrays the concurrent presence of precise maps, where maps can actually overlap. One place can overlay on the other, one can overlap on the other, and so there is no such precision. Rather, what we have are the shared memories. So, although the reader examines the national accounts solidified in time in juxtaposition with personal stories, the understanding of borders actually gets shadowed by one's personal views of space, right? And these personal views are actually juxtaposed with the Bartholomew Atlas, for example. So, various critics have read this story, the novel, in different ways. So, going away and coming back become ironical in Shadow Lines, because the impression that emerges from Ghosh's handling of experiences is that after partition, no one can go away and then come back. There is no going away and coming back. I would just harken back the case of Maulavi Sahib that I was describing in Sleepwalkers, who never moved out of old Lucknow, and he carried a piece of old Lucknow to Karachi when he had been displaced. He did not have any idea of it. Ghosh therefore concentrates on the immense void in an individual's ability to assess the true meaning of repeated violence as they overlap into each other. There are endless lines of parallel mirrors, and so they reflect the same thing from different points of space and time. Debjani Sengupta notes that narrator reaches his own disenchantment with lines and borders as he wonders how rational, well-intentioned people could believe that imaginary, arbitrary theoretical lines could cause an actual separation. Actually, the border becomes, what is created is actually, a kind of a mirror, a looking glass border, and both sides of it are so symmetrical. The people are very similar, rendering the border a farcical or a meaningless creation actually. Pavitra Bharali says that the shadowiness of the borderline puts a question mark to the geographic boundary line between country nations and its identity. Ghosh considers space place as a non-neutral, non-objective. Further, Ain Call notes that shadow line is a metaphor for evading rather than exploring political realities. The happenings of Dhaka prove that war or friendship between nations is a continuing political reality. So, we have different understandings. I mean, Ghosh is trying to tell us human history is not a culture in an island, rather, rather than being independent and distinctive and singular, we are actually continuation of each other. We are enmeshed with our neighbors, our identities are enmeshed with our neighbors, and in an intricate network of differences. Novi Kapadia states that characters intermingle not as members of distinct cultures, but as complex individuals in a world where geographical boundaries have truly become shadow lines. And further, Kavita Daya states that the shadow lines reveal the fragility of partitions, borders between nations as etched out in maps and of frontiers policed by nation states that separate people, communities and families. So, communities, I mean, Ghosh all in all has tried to show the communities as transnational through the work of historical memory. So, with that we are going to stop today's lecture and we will meet again for another round of discussions. Thank you so much.